Hello and welcome to my podcast, Smile Med. My podcast is devoted to educating the public on real and factual information that impacts our healthcare here in the United States. In no way is our healthcare system perfect. So, I hope to bring awareness to the problems that could negatively impact the infrastructure of medicine in our society. In this way, all of the informed listeners will be a voice to help fix our healthcare system to ensure everyone receives the best treatment they deserve. Today's podcast will be focused on emergency departments. Right under our noses, America's emergency departments are losing money day by day. From the outside, it's hard to see these losses. This is especially true if you have recently experienced an emergency department bill. In case you haven't experienced this, I'll put it into perspective for you. The site Vox started an emergency department bill database to see real-time emergency bill costs. Here are some of the unbelievable prices emergency departments have charged recently. For starters, it has been found that ibuprofen can cost up to $60 in the emergency department, where over the counter, it's simply $11. Common antibiotic ointment cream, bacitracin, can cost anywhere from between $1 to $76. What a big difference. Also, an antibacterial eye drop can cost up to $238. A simple pregnancy test has been found to be as high as $111 to $465. Shockingly, facility fees have been found to cost as low as $533 or as high as $3,000. This facility cost is just simply the cost to walk through the emergency department doors. And lastly, as many Americans have experienced, bills can be overwhelmingly expensive for a simple emergency department room visit. One woman shared her bill for an experience where she stayed in the waiting room the entire time and only received an ice pack and a bandage. The bill was a whopping $5,571. All I gotta say is, yikes. With the humongous emergency department bills, most would think that they are making plenty of profits. But unfortunately, this couldn't be anything further from the truth. While emergency departments do profit off of patients privately insured, they do not profit off of any other patients. In fact, anyone without insurance or that are insured through Medicare or Medicaid results in negative profit margins for emergency departments. These groups have been estimated to have lost approximately $10.7 billion for America's emergency departments in 2013 alone. Now, as I always like to preach full transparency, I'd like to note that in 2013, emergency departments did have an overall net profit of 7.8% due to revenue from privately insured patients. This is approximately $6.1 billion of revenue total. Thus, in 2013, while the emergency departments did lose a lot of money, they still profited. At this point, you may be wondering, why would I even be making this podcast, considering it's estimated that emergency departments are not losing money? However, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, and in order to do so, we must go back in history when this whole mess started. In 1986, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, also known as EMTALA, was passed. This law required that an emergency department must treat any human being that walks through the door. In all honesty, I love this law because I do believe that every human should have access to healthcare. However, the troublesome nature of this law is that every patient uninsured or underinsured is still responsible to pay their medical bills. Thus, we run into a problem of America believing everyone should have the right to receive health care, yet in our capitalistic society, we are not paying for it. Thus, we must ask, is healthcare a luxury or a right? If we consider it a luxury, then we will have to eliminate the EMTALA Act and start refusing people in the emergency departments. Yet, if we consider it a right, we must find a way to pay for all these people that need medical care but cannot afford it. Let me put this into perspective for you. Imagine you are one of the hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. that are homeless. Thus, unfortunately, you likely have no money and no health insurance. Also, let's say that while you'd probably be able to apply for Medicaid, You have not had the resources to do so, and thus you are not registered for the program. Now imagine one day you suspect that you are pregnant, and so you want to buy a pregnancy test. But unfortunately, under your circumstances, you do not have the money to pay for one. While your present life may not be to any fault of your own, the fact of the matter is that you do not have the money, and thus your only option is to go to the emergency room, because they are responsible for treating anyone who walks through the doors. You need to find out if you are in fact pregnant so you can take the necessary further steps. So, you go to the emergency department, you receive the pregnancy test, and you find out that you are not pregnant, and thus then you are discharged. The reality is, you probably have no real intention to ever pay that bill due to your unfortunate circumstances. This problem isn't necessarily any homeless person's fault. There is a larger problem here existing in the United States for having so many homeless and poor people in the first place. There are many problems with this scenario, but the one I'm going to focus on is the fact that a lot of people going into the emergency department do not have the means to pay for it. Again, this may be to no fault of their own. It may be a bigger issue with the U.S. government and how it handles the homeless population. Regardless, someone out there needs to pay the costs for the administration, labor, and any tests provided. This scenario unfortunately happens a lot in the emergency departments, and it's important that we are aware of these situations, because if we are not, emergency departments will no longer be able to sustain. At this point, you may think I'm going crazy, thinking to yourself, if emergency departments are making a profit, what does it matter that some people come in and don't pay? This doesn't affect me at all. Well, let me show you how I personally believe you are affected. Let's go back to the emergency department revenue made in 2013. Remember, in 2013, there was an estimated $6.1 billion of revenue in America's emergency departments. Now, imagine you are a hospital administrator in 2012. You know fully well that EMTALA requires you to treat all people that come into your emergency department. You also know that many of these patients that come in with no insurance or with Medicaid or Medicare will not be able to fully pay their bills. Thus, what would you do to ensure you make enough money to sustain your emergency department? Well, it is likely that you will bill those with money, those with the private insurance, way more. Thus, in my opinion, the sole reason emergency departments still have any revenue is because they are increasing the cost for the privately insured. So if you are someone with private insurance, you are likely being negatively impacted by this issue because you have to pay more in the emergency department. On the flip side, if you are someone with Medicare, Medicaid, or without insurance, you may start seeing people try to overturn the EMTALA Act due to emergency departments losing so much money. Now, I would like to add a little disclaimer to my prior rant. I do not want anyone to feel like I am targeting them or that I am blaming this issue fully on the patients without insurance or Medicaid or Medicare. In fact, I want to reiterate that I really want EMTALA to stay in place and have the hospitals make enough money without overcharging. This being said, I'm now going to go into my plan to fix this major emergency department issue. For my plan, I'm sure most would believe I would suggest universal healthcare. But I will not be proposing universal healthcare because I personally believe America is too diverse and too large for it to work. Universal healthcare also has many cons, such as long wait times, lower doctor salaries, which will decrease the quantity of doctors, less financial incentive to stay healthy, and overall, the healthy people are paying for the sickest. Plus, the tax increase to Americans would be monumental. To put this into perspective, people in Sweden, a place with universal healthcare that make over 615,700 Swedish kronos, which is approximately 61,000 US dollars, will be taxed 56% of their income. 56%. This would mean that if you made $61,000 in the US, you would only make $26,840 for the year. That is just outrageous. Thus, instead of focusing on universal healthcare, I have a whole new plan entirely. The first part of my plan is to require all people to have health insurance. A lot of people may say this goes against our right to freedom of choice. However, sometimes in order to better the lives of everyone, we have to make big decisions. Think about it this way. In America, we require everyone to carry a driver's license if they are going to drive a car. Analogously, if people want health care and want to go to the emergency department, they need to have insurance. It does not have to be public insurance. Government insurance, such as Medicare or Medicaid, will do just fine. You just have to have some type of insurance in America. Otherwise, there would be penalties. If everyone has health insurance, emergency departments are still getting paid. And then we wouldn't have this huge negative profit margin. Uninsured patients caused emergency departments in 2013 to have a profit margin of negative 54.4%. That is huge. Thus, if everyone was required to have health insurance, then the healthcare system will stop hemorrhaging money. You may be thinking, Caitlin, not everyone can afford insurance. Yes, you would be right. However, there's no way for emergency departments to continue to operate without getting paid. Now, I move into the second part of my plan. I propose that the government gives tax breaks to insurance companies that will have a special plan for those that are not eligible for Medicare or Medicaid but still cannot afford health insurance. For example, imagine that your income is just 1% over the line that qualifies for Medicaid. If you only make $1,000 more, is that really enough to cover health insurance for you and your family for an entire year? Probably not. And that's kind of why I want to make this special plan for those that can't qualify for Medicaid but still need that help. The goal of this plan would then be to make smaller premiums for those who cannot afford insurance. People that would want to partake in this plan would need to apply and make their case for why they can't pay for their own health insurance. Furthermore, the requirements needed, such as income levels and severity of financial need, would need to be determined by certain analysts that understand how all of these factors play a role. Needless to say, even with tax breaks or tax incentives, insurance companies are not going to be loving this idea. So to ease their minds even further, I will now go into the final part of my 3-part plan. I would like to open up separate clinics at every emergency department. These clinics will be for those with Medicare, Medicaid, or are a part of the new special insurance plan. EMTALA will still be intact. It will just be the small difference of whether one would go to the main emergency department or the clinic, which would all be based on your situation. I make the emphasis on the fact that EMTALA will still be intact because I did not mention earlier that EMTALA does not work at any other place other than the emergency department. Thus, if you wanted to go to an urgent care or a family practice doctor, they can turn you away. They don't have to treat you. So because this clinic would be a part of the emergency department, EMTALA would still be intact and you would still be able to be treated. One concern people may be having is that the standard of health might be considered different between the emergency department and this clinic. However, when setting up these clinics, we will ensure that they will be giving the same level of care of any main emergency department. We want everybody to be equal and for everyone to have the health care that they deserve. Now, in order to lower costs, I think it would be best if we tried to get healthcare workers such as doctors and nurses to volunteer at these clinics. Maybe some people would be turned off by that. However, if you think of the true good nature of healthcare professionals, they want to help people. And if they only had to work there a couple hours a month and we had all the healthcare professionals try to participate in this, I don't think it would be that difficult. If they really needed some extra incentivization, we could offer that they receive a tax credit or tax write-off if they hit a certain number of hours a month. Another thing to reduce the cost would be taking advantage of medical students and residents. They always want to improve themselves as well as improve their resumes in order to get better jobs in the future. We can definitely take advantage of that, and it would be a win-win situation. The medical students and residents gain really good experience, and the clinic would be getting free laborers to work for them. In addition, I also personally know that pre-med students want experience in the hospitals, and we can incentivize these students to come into these clinics and help out. They wouldn't be doing any treatments medically, but they could observe and they would see things that they otherwise wouldn't see, preparing them for the medical field. And it would allow them to do all the grunt work instead of having to hire secretaries and such like that. This being said, I don't think staffing costs would be very high at all, as long as we could get people on board. If you think about it, doctors and nurses, residents, med students, and pre-med students, they all want to care for others. Their goal in life is to help others be healthy. And thus, I don't think it would be that hard to get them to want to volunteer at our clinics. One issue with this staffing scenario is that there could be huge liability issues with less trained personnel volunteering and basically running the clinic. And with that, we'd need to ensure the clinic had huge insurance coverage itself. This is going to cost even more money for the clinic, and we need to reduce costs. Unfortunately, I don't want to go into the specifics of this issue for this podcast, but please let me know if you have any suggestions to eliminate these mitigations. Besides having healthcare workers volunteer, I would also want to make sure these clinics were funded as much as possible by donors or even the hospital. There are plenty of people that make billions of dollars every year that look for causes to donate their money to. If we make this a big cause, it is likely that they will donate their money to help save American lives. Thus, clinics will be consistently open to donate to in order to help mediate the cost of the clinic. Therefore, with a reduced cost of care and practically no staffing costs, the insurance companies would not have to worry about high costs of treatments for these patients. Hopefully, by now, the insurance companies would be happy enough to go along with the special insurance plan for those in need because they would get tax breaks and the cost of treatment for those patients would be lessening. Plus, if we do have this special plan put into place, insurance companies would get more business. And who doesn't love more business? Overall, I believe that with this 3-part plan, number 1 being health insurance required for all Americans, number 2, teaming up with insurance companies to create a special insurance plan for those in need, and 3, creating clinics next to emergency departments to help those in need, I do believe that we can curb the problem of emergency departments losing money. All of these ideas try and reduce health costs for those in need, while also ensuring emergency departments are making enough money to sustain their well-being. In order for my plan to work, we must educate the public on the resources that are available. For example, we can set up flyers or we can have ads on the internet. Doctors can inform their patients of their resources, and we can have advocacy groups to help spread the word on all the resources that are available to the public. Now, I know my plan is nowhere near perfect, but I do believe these ideas could help relieve some of these problems seen in the emergency departments all over the United States. We cannot afford to have emergency departments go bankrupt. We need their help. Thus, while I think my plan is good, I know multiple brains are better than one. If you have any comments or suggestions related to this podcast, please comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Here are the references that I used for this podcast. As always, thanks for listening to Smile Med.